I'm John Connolly, the president of Sussex County Community College, and I have the great privilege of spending a little bit of time with you talking about Where the Crawdads Sing. This is a novel by Delia Owens, and my time with you today is really about my reflections on what this book meant to me, how it affected me. In my role here at the college, I don't get to spend a lot of time reading fiction. So one of the great pleasures for me is when the college novel offers me an opportunity where I really am obligated by virtue of my job to read fiction. And there is something special about fiction. These are stories. A gentleman by the name of Arnold Pearl, who is somewhat responsible for Fiddler on the Roof and for having written much of Fiddler on the Roof. He said, look, when you're an author, when you're a writer, write about what you know. And that when you write about what you know, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, the story has greater authenticity and comes to life. And that's really very much where the Crawdads Sing is at. The author wrote this fictional piece, but the setting is really about a marsh, and it's very steeped in biology. Delia Owens is a research biologist. She spent most of her time in Africa studying animal behavior. And she's got her doctorate in that. And she really brings that to bear. And sometimes, as a biologist myself, which is why I also feel really compelled to talk with you a little bit about it, is that how did it touch me, a person, but also as a biologist? This book will not affect everybody the same way and will take away different things. And I suppose one of the first things that occurs to me is when in the storyline, just some tidbits, what is taking place in the story is that the police officers have finally gained access to the protagonist, Kaya's cabin. They've got a search warrant and they enter in. And what they find there is essentially a museum, curated specimens of various kinds, shells, feathers for birds, etc. And one of the things, there's a small line there. Let's see if I can find it. It's on page 245. It just cracked me right up. So on page 245, the police have entered into this cabin. And they're stunned by what they see. But Delia Owens is a biologist. She cannot help herself. It's like me when I was in 8th grade writing about stuff, writing about what I know. Delia Owens is writing about what she knows. She sticks this completely gratuitous piece in here where she says, as Ed entered the porch, Joe said, "Did you know that female birds have only got one ovary?" What are you talking about? See, these drawings and notes show that female birds only got one ovary. This is not relevant to the storyline. This doesn't help flesh out the characters. This is completely gratuitous biologist showing off, teaching. If the author could just teach a few tidbits of biology, she's going to use the bully pulpit of the story to make sure that everybody who reads this book knows that birds have only got one ovary and that you walk away with that. There's another one of those, of course, page 274. This is a really classic one, right? I'm going to read a little bit longer here on this one. After a simple meal of hard bread, smoked fish, Kaya sat on the edge of her front porch, staring through the screen. Just at that moment, she noticed a female praying mantis stalking along the branch near her face. The insect was plucking moths with her articulated forelegs and then chewing them up, their wings still flapping in her mouth. A male mantis, head high and proud as a pony, paraded along to court her. She appeared interested. Her antennae were flailing about like wands, checking him out, obviously. His embrace might have been tight or tender, Kaya couldn't tell, but as he probed her with his copulatory organ to fertilize her eggs, the female turned her back, long, elegant neck, and bit off his head. He was so busy humping he didn't notice, and his stump waved about as he continued his business and as she nibbled on his thorax and then his wings, and finally last, his foreleg protruded from her mouth as his headless, heartless lower body continued to copulate in perfect rhyme. Again, completely gratuitous biology. And as a biologist, I have to respond. This phenomenon, which was first recorded in 1886 in praying mantises, is for the most part an artifact. It only happens in most species when human beings are watching a praying mantis have sex. That's when it happens. And the female then bites the head off and all the rest of that. Generally speaking, there are about 180 species of true mantids. And there are only just a few that have this as a phenomenon that is observed over and over and over again. And it is always exaggerated if a human being is watching. If you take those living things and you put them in a terrarium that is isolated and so forth with either a camera or with one-way glass, the behavior completely changes. It's the classic in science where that which is observed is affected by the observation. And so that's one of those. So gratuitous, she throws it in there, but just so that everybody knows, the biology teacher here has to correct the biology instructor here that that's actually not a really biologically relevant thing. But she threw it in there anyway, and it's sort of fun. Now, this book is not about just the little tidbits of biology that she has interspersed there that she takes the opportunity to. This is a piece of literature. And as a piece of literature, so much of this is about the themes. There are multiple things happening in this story, obviously, as is the case in so many of these. But like in The Martian, a college novel that we had before, isolation is one of the themes here. And Kaya is the victim of isolation of her own doing in part and somewhat imposed by circumstance, but isolation it is. And for me, so how did it affect me reading about her isolation? It didn't feel so bad. For me, she was living a response very much like I would have. As a biologist, interested in the natural environment, as a forester, the world, Mother Nature, is this glorious laboratory and church for those who are willing to observe and worship in there. And that's what Kaya does in this story. This is her playground as well as her source of sustenance, and she spends a great deal of time with it. And so, can a human being connect to a system, an ecosystem, to something that's not an organism or a person? Well, I think that that's a part of her isolation, is that although she is connected, which is what all human beings are seeking, all human beings seek connection. What am I connected to in this world? She has that. But she is lonely. The isolation that she experiences, she tries to make up that deficit with things like Big Red, the bird in the story, okay, with the big red dot, which is involved in essentially feeding the young know to peck the beak so that the bird will then feed the babies. So there's one. But she has many of these sorts of pets out there that she tries to connect with. And then, of course, you may recall how I was moved as a cat lover by Sunday Justice, who comes into the cell. And the description of the movements of this animal being complete 100% cat was wonderful. It's wonderfully accurate. It's a wonderful description. It moved me enormously. The specialness of cats, no problem with dogs because I'm a dog person too, but cats, I suppose I'm a cat person in the moment. And that was really exceptional. And so she, in her great time of need, desperately needed to connect with somebody, something. And pretty soon thereabouts, chronologically, when Tate came to visit her, she was happy to see him, but she didn't open her heart to Tate the way that she did to an animal like Sunday Justice. So I suppose the last thing I wanted to just sort of share with you, a takeaway from me, is that little bit about me. About 2 years ago, I purchased a farm here in Sussex County, and it's been a dream of mine to have a farm where I can do the things that I would like to do in the forest, etc. And one of the great benefits of this particular farm is it's got multiple outbuildings, it's got a barn, it has a chicken coop in really good shape, and then it's got, built in around 1918 or so, a schoolhouse for kids from the family farm. So back in the day, of course, folks would have larger families for multiple reasons, but one of those was kids were labor, able to help run the farm. And it was very clear that they had 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, something like that, and they used the schoolhouse to homeschool the kids. And so there's the schoolhouse. It is about, I don't know, maybe 18, 20 feet long and about 10 feet wide. So it's a sort of a pure rectangle sort of a thing. It's got a cute little chimney. Then you go inside, and it is bare bones. It's absolutely bare bones. And when I walked into it for the first time, what do you think I thought? Oh, this is my future lab. This is my laboratory. This is where I'm going to do my experiments. My area of research involves fungi, mold, fungus, and so I'm already thinking about where I'm going to put this and where I'm going to put that, and my benches will be here and my storage will be there. My mind just goes wild. And the smell of this cabin, this old schoolhouse, is sort of overwhelming because it's just bare wood. It's bare old, century-old wood. Old carpenter put it together and that sort of thing. So when I contemplate page 272, this experience, this was the most thick experience for me. So I could feel it, I could smell it. She has just had, Kaya, our protagonist, has just had a run-in, the bad run-in with Chase. And here she is trying to find comfort, and she can't go back to her cabin because she knows that Chase will find her there. So she walks, and so the walk took 45 minutes, and at every sound, her sore and stiff body flinched and her head jerked to the side, scanning the undergrowth. Finally, the old log structure came up to its knees in the tall grass and clinging to the creek bank, and it whispered into view. Here the wind was calmer. The soft meadow was quiet. She knew that Chase was she never told Chase about her hideout, but he might have known about it. She wasn't sure, based on his own experience. Next paragraph. The pack rat smell was gone. After the ecology lab hired Tate, he came with Scupper and fixed the old cabin up so that he could stay overnight on some of his research expeditions. They had shored up the walls, straightened up the roof, brought in basic furniture, a small quilt, covered bed, a cook stove, a table and chair, pots and pans hung from the rafters, and then, completely out of place, covered with plastic, was a microscope standing on a folding table. It was a lab. It was an out-in-the-jungle research lab, which to Delia, having been in Africa, really spoke to her. Now, this is North Carolina, so for me, it's very familiar. In my graduate training, we went to places just like this, cabins in the middle of nowhere that might be, say, some of them are 100 feet long and 7 feet wide. I don't know why they built them that way. I think it was so that you could have sort of this train car way of approaching the protocols in the science lab and going from one thing or one process to the next, and for storage purposes and whatnot. And you had multiple doors in and out and all kinds of things. So, but it reminded me very much of that. Because I, about a year ago, at a garage sale, found a research-grade microscope that brand new would cost about $14,000. I got it for $50. And that was the first thing I did, is I took that microscope covered with the plastic and took it into my someday aspirational fungus lab in the old schoolhouse on my farm, and so, and with its smell and everything. So this story really spoke to me. It spoke to me as a biologist. It spoke to me about connections and isolation. And again, every book, every good story, it's really at its roots, from my point of view, every good story comes down to connections and what connects people to the world and what they do with those connections. So I'm glad it all came out pretty well for Kaya. And yeah, thank you so much for your time and your willingness to share some time with me as I talk about my feeling about the book.